31. Gryph floated without care or need. A distant and dull boom rose from the depths and touched the edge of his hearing. It was like the heartbeat of an ancient leviathan awakened and hungry to feed. He forced his mind towards the sound and realized he was in the depths, hidden in darkness. Something was calling him back, something important. The weapon, a voice said inside his mind, a voice he realized was his own. With awareness came remembrance, and with memory came panic. He pushed up through the thick nothingness to consciousness and the pain that came with it. Gryph gasped in pain as full consciousness returned. He could not move, and flashbacks of the paralytic dirge had used in the Barrow came back to him. The thundering boom that had drawn him back to the world of pain came again, and he understood that someone or something was trying to smash through the massive stone doors. Wick and the others? A thought came to him. Avernerius? He opened his eyes. He was hanging upside down, tied and bound, his body enveloped in the arachnid's webbing. Long strands twined around him and then disappeared up and into the shadows of the ceiling. He wrenched his body back and forth in a feeble attempt to escape, but only aggravated his ill-healed gut wound further. Below him, Mirthendir sat cross-legged, eyes closed, Gryph's soul-bound bag resting on his lap. The Prince Regent was muttering under his breath, and his hands moved in intricate patterns over the bag. He's trying to break the soul binding, like he did with the seal of the Dwarven King. Shock bit into Gryph. How is it even possible? The goddess who'd given him the bag assured him that nobody, not even the gods, could break the binding. Yet somehow this aberrant, this accident of horror and malice had managed it once already. He already has the seal. What horrors can he unleash with the eggs? Gryph watched the elf lord struggle to force his hand into the satchel. The bag is trying to resist him. Sweat trickled down the elf lord's brow, and a grunt of pain slipped past his lips, but he pushed harder, and then he had access. His whole body shook for several moments as he cycled through the bag's inventory. A moment later, he pulled his writhing prize free. Mirthendir looked down upon the egg in triumph as the larva's mind screeched its hate at him. Mirthendir placed the egg sac into a glass and metal box. As he closed the lid, the telepathic screaming ceased. Some kind of stasis, like the bag. Mirthendir returned his attentions to the bag. Sweat trickled down the man's brow. Whatever method he was using to break the stasis took an extreme amount of effort. I have to get free. The booms smashing against the door grew in intensity, but were not enough to break Mirthendir's focus. Maybe I can catch him unawares. Gryph suspected that the man was not stupid enough to leave Gryph to his own devices without keeping some kind of eye on him. An answer came to Gryph in the form of an arachnid. His night vision spotted the creature before it emerged from the shadows clinging to the ceiling. The glint of gold and brass as it emerged into the light heightened the predatory zeal in every motion of the once friendly service machine. The foot-wide mechanical beast eased close to him, its eyes bearing a specter of life. A part of him is watching me, Gryph realized. Time to give that part a show. You don't think the Arbaleth will accept what you are, do you? Gryph said, staring at the cluster of crystals that were the construct's eyes. An aberrant who is both Prime and El Edrine, but also neither. You're an obscenity. You have no place in this world or any other. Below, the elf lord moved slightly, his meditative state nudged by Gryph's taunt. The booming against the door grew louder, and more particles of dust fell like slow-motion rain from above. I need to buy more time. The arachnid stood tall, spreading its forelegs wide. A small nozzle pushed from what Gryph had thought of as the machine's mouth, and a wad of sticky, fibrous webbing erupted from the nozzle. It smacked Gryph in the face with enough force to draw blood from his lip. It only took a few points of his health, but he was now gagged. Guess he isn't in a talking mood. The elf lord returned to his task, his left hand still working the intricate movements, but his right now hovered over the bag's opening. Gryph moved his body back and forth, pushing his momentum in a slight pendulum rotation as he looked for his spear. After a minute, Gryph found his weapon and frowned. Thick webbing held the spear to one of the stone columns. The dark gray color told him it was already solidifying. Soon it would be hard as stone. His eyes moved back to Mirthandir, whose hand shook as if he was trying to push it through solid stone. The Prince Regent was sweating from the effort. The effort of breaking the seal is costing him dearly. I need to end this. Now. He let his mind strategize, and a few moments later he had a plan. Not a great one, but he'd take anything. He closed his eyes and let the mana flow through him. He focused his mind onto the glowing sphere of multicolored light as it pulsed into the center of his chest. His mind drew several strands from it, and they pulsed and spun in many different directions, ready for Gryph to unleash their pent-up power. He was ready, and the fate of thousands, if not millions of people would come down to timing and luck. He activated his ring of air shield, his mind shaping and forming the field of solidified air. He hoped the webbing was incapable of resisting the force exploding from the shield. If not, he'd be hanging up here until Mirthandir had what he wanted. He knew the Elf Lord would kill him the second he no longer needed him. The sound of rushing wind battled a crunching tear as the hardened webbing exploded around Gryph in a halo. His bonds cut, Gryph's body was again the victim of gravity, and he fell, his head speeding toward the stone floor 10 feet below. He spun, tore the gag of webbing from his mouth, and landed on his feet as 3 tendrils of mana sped down his arms. 2 pulsed into the bracers at each wrist, while the third made his arm as rigid as stone. The repeated booms of the monster trying to smash through the massive door brought a surge of joy to Gryph's heart. I need to buy time. Gryph extended his arm towards his trapped spear, and a cylinder of rock flew from the outstretched palm. He'd cast this flying stalactite with a flat nose instead of the spell's standard sharp tip. It cracked into the hardening fibers trapping his spear like a battering ram, as Gryph tugged with the magnetic force of his bracers. The stone's impact cascaded shards of the hardened webbing and the stone of the pillar in a wide arc, but the spear held fast. Gryph pushed more mana into the bracers, and he willed virtual muscles to flex. Behind him, he felt Mirthandir stir, and panic rose like bile in Gryph's throat. He forced himself not to look back, concentrating all his will into the bracers. He felt the tearing of the webbing before he heard it, and his spear was free and flying to his outstretched hand. Gryph spun and brought the tip of the spear down, activating penetrating strike, impale, and Yiriel's bite. He heard the thunk of metal on wood as Mirthandir parried his blow with his staff. Sparks of electrical discharge flowed harmlessly along the spear's tip, and the aberrant elf grinned at Gryph through malevolent eyes. "Too late," Mirthandir said, and he held the second arbaleth egg in an upturned palm, like Eve holding the forbidden apple. Gryph's eyes went wide with shock, and he spun his spear back, readying another attack. Gryph thrust forward, but another foul screeching rose in his mind, and he winced in agony. He pushed his way through the pain and stabbed with his spear. But first one, then two, then a dozen strands of thick webbing wrapped around his wrists, arms, torso, and legs, tugging him from all directions. Mirthandir pushed the second egg into another of the stasis devices and walked to the nexus table at the center of the room. There he placed the seal of the Dwarven King into the slot and pushed down. The clang of metal on stone rose in the chamber, and a circular pedestal rose up from the stone table. Gryph struggled against his bonds, bringing the spear's tip down upon one of the sticky strands of webbing. He sawed at it, slicing through the spliced strands. "Drop the spear," Mirthandir said, almost absent-mindedly, like an exhausted teacher scolding a teen with a spitball. Gryph struggled more, and the strand of webbing snapped. Another two replaced the one he'd cut, and they wrenched his arm into an impossible angle. The pain forced him to drop his spear, its dull clang of metal on stone echoing through the suddenly silent room. Both men knew what the absence of sound meant. "Looks like your friends have given up. Guess it is just you and me now." Mirthandir closed his eyes and held his hand over a rune-covered section of the nexus table, and the walls of the column spun back down into the table, revealing a hollow that contained a skull bearing a crown of simple iron encrusted with jewels. "The iron crown rests on the brow of the last Stone King," Gryph thought, hearing Eret's words in his mind. Then a rather macabre thought occurred to him. "I'm staring at my own skull." Mirthandir reached into the hollow in the pillar, hands hovering an inch from the crown. He closed his eyes as if performing some reverent ceremony. Then he pulled the band of cold iron up to his brow. He set the crown onto his head, opened his eyes, and stared at Gryph. The movement cast a multi-hued halo around his head, and he smiled. Gryph used Identify on the crown. The Iron Crown. The Iron Crown was the symbol of the Stone King of the Thalmir, a symbol of his authority over all the Thalmir. The first Thalmir High King, Durgoth the Doombringer, crafted it as a symbol of authority and unity after his victory over the last Dragon King. Each of the 7 gemstones embedded in the band of cold iron is an icon that represents the power of each of the 7 great Thalmir kingdoms. The 6 smaller stones represent the 6 smaller kingdoms, all subservient to Dar Thorim as represented by the central luminescent diamond. Item class: Elder Artifact. Item category: Passive, Active. Passive powers: Powers, unknown. Active powers: Powers, unknown. Mana limit: Unknown. Cooldown. Unknown. Icons slotted. 7 of 7. Icon powers. Unknown. What is an elder artifact, and why does my identified talent not tell me anything? Gryph gazed upon the wondrous crown. A part of him wondered why the Thalmir had crafted it from base iron when they had access to more precious metals. The icons were all many-hued gemstones glowing with internal light. "Have you ever possessed real power, Gryph?" Mirthandir asked. "Not the martial skills of a warrior or the petty magics of the elements." He held his hand palm upwards and let arcane fire dance across it. "But real power, the ability to make another's mind your own." "Like you did with the dwellers," Gryph said, struggling to free himself. "Of a sort, I suppose. They were weak of mind, the so-called dwellers in the dark, but they served their purpose. A bit over the top and dramatic for my tastes, what with their foolish masks and their inane ceremonies. But they did provide the perfect distraction, and the irony was too good to pass up." What irony, Gryph thought. I'm missing something here. Mirthandir seemed ignorant of his slight faux pas and pushed another rune-covered stone on the stone table. The rumble built in the ceiling, and a torrent of water exploded from the pipes above them. The sluiceways filled and plunged into the pipes at the far end. The water went from raging to calm as the sluiceways filled. Then a rumble of stone sliding against stone rose, and the wall behind Mirthandir parted and slid into the floor. Light globes popped to life one by one, revealing a room that extended hundreds of feet into the mountain. The size of the room was impressive, but what the light revealed was downright terrifying. Thousands upon thousands of tall, featureless men stood silent and unmoving, as if waiting for someone to command them. "The Warborn," Gryph said, an icicle of fear punching into his heart. "I know nothing of where you come from, this place you call Earth, but I know one thing. We have both been lied to all our lives. They tell us that we are unique, important, that we are here for a higher purpose, part of a great plan. It is a pleasant fiction I once believed. Then my body, my mind, perhaps even my soul, was fed upon." The Prince Regent's hand moved to the back of his neck, where spine met skull. Fearful fingers hovered above the nape, and, for a moment, his eyes were distant and his thoughts were elsewhere. "When all else is stripped away, the truth is exposed." "And what truth is that?" Gryph said, struggling against his bonds. "That we are alone in an uncaring universe, and malevolent beings lurk in the darkness. There is no higher purpose, no source that loves us all. There is only the endless, repetitive cycle of death and rebirth, the here and now, and we are not the masters of the realms." "I know what you are," Gryph said. A sinister grin crossed Mirthandir's face. "Oh, I doubt that. You are that darkness. You are an aberrant of the prime." A look of rage crossed Mirthandir's face, and without warning, a half-dozen of the arachnids close to him imploded, as if they'd suddenly found themselves beneath 1,000 feet of crushing water. He turned his gaze on Gryph, and for the tiniest of moments, Gryph felt as if his own head would implode as well. Then the elf lord calmed and gave Gryph a malevolent grin. What the hell was that? Telekinesis? The Zai-Dai. He has filled your mind with false understanding. He has no more idea what I am than I once did. I am unlike anything the realms has ever seen. I am so much more than any of you, and so much less. I am the divine and the base. I am all and nothing. You think you're a god? Mirthandir laughed, and it was a genuine laugh, not the wicked chortle of the mad or the cartoonish mwahaha of some maniacal villain. The gods, he said with a dismissive wave. The gods are petty power brokers who use fear, violence, and lies to sway the masses. They are pathetic, seeking to force their small order on the peoples of the realms. You know the truth as well as I, that civilization stands forever on a precipice, and all it needs is the slightest of nudges to fall into chaos. And you plan to give the world a nudge? You don't see. Even now. Disappointment crossed his face. I'd hoped you, of all people, would understand. Why would I understand? I felt it on the deep water. You and I are more alike than you admit. You have seen some of what I have seen. He held out his hand. I will show you more. Visions exploded in Gryph's mind. Arbaleth larva, all voracious teeth and tentacles digging into his brain. The prime armada soaring down upon Corin, laying waste to cities and towns. An army of Zai-Dai led by Illyrith sorcerers and overseen by Arbaleth in their massive floating tanks of water and elementum. Mighty armies falling before the onslaught of the Dark Ascendancy, cities razed, kingdoms destroyed. For all of this, Gryph was a bystander, unable to move or help. Then came the worst of it all. A planet conquered, and hundreds of Arbaleth working in concert, performing a ritual, casting a spell on a massive scale. Fear bit into Gryph as he stood on the blasted plains of the world he now called home and looked skyward as a cancerous infection ate away at the light of the sun, turning the world dark. They are coming. You know it to be true. You have heard their call in the back of your mind. Gryph had heard, and he had tried to pretend he had not. A horrid truth filled Gryph. He felt it in his bones and in his soul. The Prime were far worse than Utserio the Barrow King, who had sacrificed the eternal souls of uncounted thousands to extend his horrid half-life. They were worse than Alaron, whose threats of murder and violence were just the tip of the evil he was capable of. The Dark Ascendancy was coming. Gryph knew it to be true, and knew they were a danger greater than any he had yet encountered in the realms, and it was coming for them all. Yes, you see it, don't you? The Prime will not rest until they extinguish all life, until nothing but prime remain." "And you want to help them," Gryph said, and spat. "They will never accept you." "I'm not going to help them," Mirthandir raged, causing nervous skittering among the arachnids. "I will crack open their watery prisons and turn them into coffins." "That is why you need the Warborn." "The Warborn?" Mirthandir laughed. "They are mere tools, impressive ones if our friend Eret is any indication, but tools nonetheless. They are a means to an end, but they are not the weapon that Thalmir was so desperate to protect. You know that, don't you?" The look on Gryph's face spoke volumes. "Oh, my foolish friend, you disappoint me. You are not who I'd hoped you were. When we first met, I sensed another mind, touched by the prime that was somehow still free, and I rejoiced. Here I thought you were someone like me, someone strong enough to do what must be done." "I will not help you." "We shall see. I had hoped you would join me willingly. See that what I do is necessary. But one way or another, you will help me destroy them." "Work with me, then, not against me," Gryph begged. Sadness, perhaps even loneliness, crossed Mirthandir's face. He went silent, staring at Gryph with melancholy, as a moment of debate raged inside the aberrant elf prince. Then Mirthandir's eyes went from Gryph to something behind him. Gryph could not turn, but a sizzling hiss grew, and then a deep orange glow backlit him. The sound grew louder, and a jet of superheated air blasted into the room, bringing an instant sheen of sweat to Gryph's skin. Worse, whatever small chance Gryph had of swaying Mirthandir burned away in the heat. "Your friends are persistent, I'll say that for them, but they are too late." He pushed down on another of the rune-covered stone buttons. For a moment, nothing happened, but then yet another rumble of stone on stone thrummed into Gryph. It was a sound he was growing very tired of hearing. A circular depression on the floor in front of the table irised open, and a large cube of cast adamantine rose from the depths. Identify gave him no information, but he knew one thing. This, not the Warborn, was the weapon Thalmir had sacrificed their city to protect. "You already know that the last Stone King went mad, but do you know why?" "I'm bored with your tales." "No, you're not," Mirthandir said with a grin. "Like me, you understand that true power lies in knowledge. It is amazing what you can learn if you know where to look." He removed the arbaleth egg from the stasis container and held it up to the light. The larva inside the opaque sac spasmed in fury. Gryph felt the clarion call of the ethereal monstrosity tug at his mind once more. The larva knew who he was, knew that he had killed its parent. No, that was not accurate. Not its parent, but its former self. This larva was not an offspring of the arbaleth Gryph had slain, but a continuation. Gryph had no time to contemplate the horror of that truth as Mirthandir spoke again, eyes glued to the arbaleth egg. "Did you know the last Stone King had one of these? It was plundered during the Alliance raid. He believed it could help him defeat the Prime. Had he been stronger of mind, he would have been right. But he was a desperate and broken man, and the Prime used those weaknesses against him. The once luminescent diamond at the crown's brow flared with darkness, sucking in the light around it, and Gryph felt a deep sadness seep into his soul. Mirthandir waved his hand over the cube, and a section of wall flowed apart, revealing a small alcove. He eased the leathery sack into the slot, and the cube wall flowed closed. The pressure in Gryph's mind disappeared, and for a moment the world was silent. Then, from deep inside the cube, a low hum rose at the edge of hearing, like a distant swarm of bees. By the time his artificers had finished building the Warborn, the Stone King's mind was gone. He had become an avatar for the Prime, and with their guidance, he built this. The Elf Lord placed his hands on the adamantine cube. It was to be the ultimate weapon in the war, built by a Thalmir to be used not against the Dark Ascendancy, but by them, against all the free peoples of the realms. This is how the Prime operate. They will tolerate no sentience but their own. They infest, infect, and devour. Gryph knew the Prince Regent, this aberrant elf that was both more and less than Prime, spoke the truth, and it terrified him. I ensured that the Prime have seen what I have done here today. They know the weapon is found, and when they return to Corin, they will come for it. At Mirthandir's touch, the top of the cube flowed open, and the low humming grew to the cacophonous buzzing of rage. I say, let them! A torrent of black fog zipped up and out of the vessel, spinning and twirling in the air like a million tiny mites on the hunt for prey. The black fog soared and twined into the air above Mirthandir and stopped, like a predator sizing up its prey. It pulsed and throbbed, spun upwards, and then flew at Gryph.